plan risk management, a process which gives us risk management plan. As with all the other knowledge areas, project risk management also has a process in a planning process groups which tells us how are we going to manage and execute remaining processes. So when you are making a risk management plan, what critical input do you need? You need to understand the organization attitude towards risk, because risk management plan will tell us how are we going to identify, rank and monitor risks. So the organization attitude towards risk, the stakeholders attitude towards risk is a very essential input for project risk management. The risk management plan will tell us which risk should be taken at a higher severity. For example, organization may be very sensitive towards time-related baselines. So let us look at inputs of plan risk management. As I said, we need to know the plan which we have prepared in other knowledge areas. So we look at project management plan as an input. Now this PMP will have all the subsidiary plans. It will also have a baselines. Now you may wonder from where these baselines can come. We are just starting the risk management process. Yes, there could be a possibility that you may not have the baselining at the stage when you are doing plan risk management, because after identifying risk, after identifying the risk response plan, you would be doing good amount of scheduling and cost estimation activities based on the risk you identify. But whatever information you have in PMP, that all information, the planning approach is relevant for making a risk management plan. Now, second input you need is project charter. Now, as I said, a risk management plan is driven by the organizations and stakeholders' attitude towards risk. But in some cases, a project may drive a different type of risk behavior. Maybe a risk adverse, the company, the organization which is not taking risks so frequently may get into a project where they are exploring a new market and they are open to take a risk in that particular project. So the project charter tells us a project specific risk attitude. It may also tells us a stakeholder's need related to risk management. The other the input which we need is stakeholder register. Because they are important. Their attitude towards risk is very important. Enterprise environmental factor. Is this organization okay to take a 10 million risk? Or they are very sensitive about if risk goes beyond $1 million? This will come from enterprise environmental factor. Organization process assets. A checklist for helping us in identifying risk, lesson learned, templates, risk categories, some set of general risk. These all can help us in identifying and managing risk. So organization process asset input is important. Now what do we have to do? We need to identify what all factors we should take care while we execute project risk management. In order to identify that, we need to put an analytical techniques. So first tool and technique is analytical technique. In this analytical technique, primarily we are focusing on identifying risk attitude. Now, there are two terms which are usually used when we talk about risk attitude or analytical techniques. We need to identify risk tolerance of the stakeholders of the organization. We also need to identify a risk threshold. Risk threshold is a number or is a benchmark which tells us that if risk goes beyond this point, it needs to be taken care more seriously. The risks which are below this particular threshold can be managed just by applying contingency reserve. So analytical technique helps us in identifying these. It may also help us in giving a strategic risk ranking to a project. Now, strategic risk ranking is a one level ranking which tells an overall risk associated with a project. As I said, if we are going into a new market, the risk ranking would be high because the failure of a product or a project is relatively higher. If we are going into the same market which we have been doing before, it's a matured, it's a kind of repetitive project, then the risk ranking for that particular project may be low. So analytical techniques helps us in identifying this. Now there are two other techniques which are used. One is expert judgment and other is meeting. Now these two may happen together. Expert may come together and discuss their judgment, their analysis in a meeting. So what they do, they try to identify what kind of thresholds we should be following. At what frequency we should be controlling and monitoring risk. How should we respond to it? What kind of reporting format should be used? What is the definition of probability or impact? When we say that this is a high probability, in which particular scenario, what kind of symptoms if we see associated with the risk, then we can say it's a high probability. So definition of probability and impact may also come. Now, on this basis, on the basis of our meetings, expert judgment and analytical technique, we come up with risk management plan. Now this risk management plan will tell us how are we going to do our rest of the processes. It will also tell us a methodology for managing the complete risks. It will also give us a definition of various terms which are used in risk management. Now it will also, when we say how, it will tell how are we going to identify risk. Means which all checklist we will use. Are we using risk category? The risk category may also represent it in the form of risk breakdown structure. What is risk breakdown structure? It's an hierarchical representation of risk categories. For example, we have a risk at a node. Then we say there is a cost related risk, there is a time related risk, there is a quality related risk. In a cost, a risk related with an external factor, market conditions, a risk related with an internal factor, productivity and all, risk related with an estimation error, etc., etc. So we can make an hierarchical representation of risk category, which is called risk breakdown structure. Why do we do this? It helps us in identifying risk. By visualizing these categories, we can visualize, okay, in this category I have these many risks, at the lower level I have these many risks, and we can consolidate the risk on the basis of category. The checklist, the taxonomies, the previous using organizational process asset, using the lesson learned also helps us in identifying risk. How are we going to assess risk? Now, assessment, the definition of probability, the definition of impact, the risk exposure to a threshold. At what threshold we should think that exposure is beyond threshold. So these things also defined in risk management plan. How are we going to respond? Which all strategies we can take. For example, in this particular project, I may say that we cannot use transfer risk. We don't have anyone else to transfer. Whatever risk happens, we need to take care of it. So that I need to plan here. I need to tell my team in the risk management plan that don't use transfer strategy like that. We also need to talk about how are we going to control and monitor risk. Means a report format and frequency of conducting these review. This all should be documented in risk management plan. So once we make the risk management plan, we expect that our team members, our team leaders should look at it and perform their risk identification, assessment, response planning and controlling activities in line with risk management plan. And this will tell us how should we execute or how should we perform remaining processes of project risk management.